2 days ago, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos State presented a 1.388 trillion naira budget for the 2022 fiscal year, tagged Budget of Consolidation. The governor said the budget was premised on a total revenue of 1.135 trillion naira and deficit financing of 253 billion naira. The breakdown showed that 546.9 billion, or 41% of the budget, was projected for recurrent expenditure, while 351 billion naira was allocated to capital spending next year. Deficit financing, according to the governor, would be by external and domestic loans and bonds, which is said were well within the state's fiscal sustainability parameters. Now joining us to throw more light on what makes the 2022 budget distinct from the others before it, and how it can engender economic prosperity in Lagos, is Sam Egube, the State Commissioner for Budget and Planning. Good morning, Mr. Egube, and welcome to the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Abati. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Well, before we begin with the 2022 budget for Lagos State, well, how is the 2021 budget performing so far? Let's start from there.
Okay, it's been a great year, 2021, with all its challenges. And I would say the budget for 2021 so far is doing very well against all odds. We are at about approaching 80% in the budget performance, on the high 70th percentile. On the overall budget, the interesting thing is that when you look at our revenue expectations, at 987%, you find that we are performing at about 78% of that budget. The federal expectation in terms of the federal allocations that come to the state, we are over the board at over 100%, and our internally generated revenue is coasting along at about 73%. On the expenditure side, I just told you what the budget is like in terms of performance. And so on the whole, I think the 2021 budget is doing very well. We expect it to ramp into the mid to high 80s as we coast into the closing out the fourth quarter of the year. So we're doing okay so far.
What are the broad objectives of the 2022 budget of consolidation?
Well, this is going to be the last full year budget before the elections for 2023. So we have rightfully christened this budget the budget of consolidation. And what we are doing basically is to ramp up our focus on completing ongoing projects, because we seem to have a lot of pots in the fire cooking. So we'll basically be ramping up all our investment to close out the existing project. But we'll also be doing a lot around our people in terms of our human capital development. And in that area, when you talk of human capital development, it's not just its education, it is health, and it is social intervention to just ensure that there's a lot of inclusion in the economy. And then we shall look very closely also at interventions in the micro and small businesses. All along, the general approach of this administration, led by Mr. Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, was basically to drive the themes agenda, and the spirit in which we're driving it basically is to build what we call Team Lagos, meaning we needed to encourage citizens' participation, because at every point in time, the citizens are very powerful. They put you there in government in the first place. They pay just a percentage of what they earn in taxes, and therefore they are more resourced than the government itself. And therefore, cultivating that partnership and building one Team Lagos has been very crucial. But we also have a mega city to build to get it to 21st century standard. And in that area, we need to continue to optimize the infrastructure. I use the word optimize because we're not just building, but we are building sensibly to ensure that we lift up the burden of investments in Lagos and in the people of Lagos as well. But Lagos cannot do it alone. Therefore, as a matter of strategy and the way we move is that we build also partnerships. partnerships with other governments, federal government, state government, and local governments. We build partnerships with the citizens. Like you saw in COVID, that the citizens intervenes just as well as the government intervenes, and as well as building partnerships with the private sector. It is all of this coming together that makes Lagos what it is. We also seek to build the economy. In other words, we begin to push forward the agenda of improving the ease of doing business in Lagos and to declare Lagos readiness and openness for business. But in all of this, you must look at the future. Where do the people stand in all of this? We need to continue to develop our people to ensure that their productivity improves and increases, and to ensure that we're able to protect the vulnerable. So this is the broad drivers that we're using to deliver on the team's agenda, focusing on completing existing projects, heightened completion, and then human capital intervention in health, education, and social interventions, as well as small businesses.
Okay, so I'd like you to give us a highlights of the budget, and also added to that, I would like you to also tell us, about the debt stock. So if you're doing fiscal financing, debt financing of about 200 billion, added to the pre-existing debt stock of about 500 billion, correct me if I'm wrong, so that's debt stock now about 700 billion, then also, enunciate the highlights of the budget, but also tell me about the debt stock and enunciate the highlights of the budget. Thanks.
I can't exactly hear you clearly, but if I hear you correctly, I see that you are expressing concerns about the debt stock and how the budget is going to be financed. And I think you are concerned about its sustainability, right? If that is what you are asking, because I can't hear you too well, I just heard a bit of you. I will say that you recall that just recently Fitch, an international rating agency, did upgrade us from a AA rating to AAA. And the implication of that is that they viewed that our sustainability remains very strong when compared to our peers, both locally and internationally. Therefore, it is not just the stock of debt, right, that matters when you are looking at your debt position. You are looking at your debt service capability. And what Fitch says, and what we know to be true, is that Lagos remains the leading light in Nigeria as it has to do with sustainability. Our debt sustainability position remains strong at about 25%, even though the limits which were permitted is to go up to 40%. So we have significant amount of room to borrow. I think what is just important is that when you borrow, you are not reckless about it. And for Lagos, 100% of our borrowing goes into delivering capital expenditure projects, projects that speak to the future of Lagosians, projects that would create employment and facilitate business growth across our landscape. So I give an example. When we are investing quite aggressively in the red line and the blue rail line, when that is complete, there are huge investments, over 200 billion in investments. Right? But when it is complete, you will have about 10 bridges over the red line, moving people from Agbado on the rail all the way to Oyingbo. And what that means is that it's going to cut the journey time by 250%, increasing very materially the productivity of our people and the amount of people that can move from Okoko to Marina and that can move from Agbado to Oyingbo in phase 1 and then to Marina in phase 2. So that is the way we choose it, and I think the Debt Management Office, Fitch Rating, and ourselves, we understand how to drive it. Mr. Governor has significant experience in the banking industry, so do I, and so also our Commissioner for Finance. So we are holding the financial and fiscal positions really strong and really healthy.
Well, let me ask you, what are the major areas of resource allocation in this 2022 budget? And since you started speaking, people have been bombarding me with text messages about some other issue that I think, well, it's not strictly about the budget. They're asking, is this Commissionership of Finance in Lagos, is it permanently zoned to non-Yorubas, because you are from Delta State, I think, you know, and some people are asking, you know, what is the Delta State man doing, being the Commissioner for Finance in Lagos? But the main question from me is about that resource allocation, and particularly any special emphasis on rail transportation, transportation being a major source of concern in Lagos State.
Okay, well, that's what we do in budget and planning. Three things we do. We are responsible for strategy, working with Mr. Governor. We also, through the budget systems, deliver what we view as the way the resource will be allocated to drive that particular strategy. And then we come back at the end of the day to evaluate how we have performed from time to time. Now, the truth is that Lagos is an interesting place. Lagos is that place that Nigeria should see as an example, and that is why someone who has his origin from Delta is Commissioner for Economic Planning in Lagos. And that's not I. I mean, you have Kabiru from Katsina State, who is also in charge of waterfront infrastructure, and you have Joe Egube from Anambra State, who is in the cabinet of Lagos. Lagos will spare nothing in trying to attract talent to drive the business of Lagos. There are over 300 tribes in Lagos of people who call themselves Lagosians. And that diversity is what Lagos seeks to show leadership in calling people like us to come and serve. Now, in terms of the way the budget is allocated, like I said, we are focusing very heavily on trying to drive home our existing works. Right, and we see the end in sight. We see that things are beginning to come together, beginning to take shape, and therefore we are investing a lot in infrastructure. We are going to be putting about 364 billion, which is about 26% of the entire budget on infrastructure. Many times when people try to interpret the budget, typically they see infrastructure as what will be done by the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure. But it's more than that. It's all the combination of infrastructure work that will be done across all the sectors, across all the MDAs in government. So it's important we look at that. It's also important that when you look at our commitments in education, right, you also look at it as a mixed bag. Not just what is invested by the Ministry of Education alone, but also what works will invest in the infrastructure around education. So you will see us in ramping up completion. You see us doing a lot of community roads this time around. We have grown the investment that you will see in those inner roads by about 32%, which is part of the overall infrastructure that we shall put up with. But in terms of human capital development, we are growing that to 317 billion by 32% from what by 27% from what we did last year. And that forms a big block of the investment, about 23 billion of the total spend that we shall be seeing, right? But you will also see spends in health, where we are growing that by 24% to 123 billion in 2022. But we believe that, you know, as you begin to move around infrastructure, technology is one thing that is going to play a major role in helping us leapfrog. So you see a lot of our interventions that are going around in the broadband infrastructure we are building around the metropolis, 3,000 in phase 1 and up to 6,000 in phase 2, to bring high-speed internet into the environment. It's also a place where our youth can engage and be meaningfully employed and would demonstrate a significant part of innovation. And in that area, we are growing it by 37% to 32 billion, right? This 2022, basically to create an ecosystem that helps with productivity. In a place like Lagos, where you have so many cars on the road and there are challenges around traffic management, you begin to find the opportunities in productivity that can come from technology. And Lagos State is determined to do that and to position Lagos as the technology hub in Africa. Today, we are ranked ahead of leading cities like Nairobi on the technology and the startup support space all right? And we intend to continue to do all of that, basically to strengthen the infrastructure base of Lagos, to make it easier to do business in Lagos, to ensure that the productivity of people that operate in Lagos operate with improved productivity, and then we see the outcome in the state's GDP.
Right. I guess the governor actually referred to Lagos State as a melting pot with people from all over Nigeria residing here. So I guess it does make sense that the cabinet reflects that. But you've touched on quite a few areas of growth. But what about tourism and entertainment? What else haven't we really discussed? Agriculture. Can you take us through the budget?
Okay. I think I'm hearing a bit. I guess what you are talking about is what are we going to be looking at things around entertainment and tourism. The way we had viewed tourism and entertainment from the beginning is that they have remained leading lights for us. It's not unusual to go past Heathrow or any of the islands around the world and you hear artist music being played around. And therefore, we felt that it was an industry and a sector that we needed to pay particular attention to. We believe that if we focused on them, they are a very wide platform also for employment. And that is why we had put some money behind our employment trust fund, about $1 billion, for the sector, right, the entertainment sector, to be able to assess, to actually aid their development and their growth. But beyond that also, we have partnered with Ebony Life and Delioc to begin to train our people with international standard type of exposure and training. The idea is that we would improve their capacities and prepare them for the market. But beyond that, you need to also look at the education system. And one of the things we are doing around the education system is to begin to introduce a comprehensive school system and strengthen our vocational inputs. Because Lagos State is a high-density state with a lot of people. But in terms of the demography, you find out that over 65 to 70% are what you would classify as active poor. And therefore, ensuring that they are trained vocationally, right, actually helps to stimulate employment around. And this sector, the entertainment sector and the tourism sector, is a very fertile area for doing that. We believe that that sector has been strong in representing the Nigerian brand, and will continue to support that sector in all the ways in which we've put down. When we engaged them earlier, before this administration came into power, what they told us was, look, they needed talent. Talent was one major gap which they have, and the government of Mr. Babajide Olusola Solo is doing just that in attracting international help and mixing it up with local talent to develop our young people and help them develop along this line, which seems to be strong. And I think we're making significant progress in that area. We are pushing a lot of investment in the Randall Museum. It's a significant amount of investment. And once that is complete, it will be world-class, right? And our entertainment industry will be happy when they see that done.
Okay, I'll go back to the question I asked you before. And good thing you talked about Fitch and the ratings agency. That's good, you know, that they have confidence in Lagos State. But specifically, I want the numbers on the debt stock of Lagos. Is it about 700 billion now? Because plus this 236 billion. What's the exact number on the debt stock? One, that's the first question. Second question, sir, will be about, you know, the capital spend. Because the capital spend expenditure takes about 59% of this budget, which is quite okay. And the recurrent takes about 41%. What are the top 5 projects you will be heavily spending on this year with this budget in Lagos? Those 2 questions, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. The debt stock for Lagos is something over a trillion naira, just a few hundred millions over a trillion. Now, that sounds huge because we are number 1 in terms of how borrowed we are. But the borrowing is though significant, has very, very favorable terms, right? We are borrowing a significant amount of that in single-digit interest rate in Naira, which is shielded from exchange rate risks elements. But the stock is not the challenge to anybody. The real challenge is your debt service. There is a big difference between borrowing ₦1 billion and have to pay that off in 3 years and borrowing ₦1 billion and have to pay that off in 10 years. It presents different levels of burden on the balance sheet of the state. Most of our debts are long-term debts. They are low-interest burden, and that is why Fitch can upgrade us from a AA+ rating to a AAA rating, and it is for that reason in terms of thinking of our sustainability. In terms of the big projects we are doing, like which this budget will be speaking to, we are currently, and I mentioned it before, we are going on with the rail project, the Red Line and the Blue Line project. When that project is complete, it will move 32 million people from Okoko and from Agbado to Oyigbo and to Marina, and it will shorten their journey time by about 250%. The Red Line alone has 10 bridges over it. It has 8 modern stations. It has 13 pedestrian bridges. We'll be doing also and completing the Lekki Ekpe Expressway, right, all the way to Ekpe Junction. It's a rigid pavement and expansion into 6-lane highway, right? It's going to help us as we close out in the deep sea port to take heavy vehicular movements across. That is another huge project. We'll be doing and completing the regional road, which is a parallel road to the Lekki Ekpe Expressway, right, all the way from VGC to Freedom Way, right? That also is something we'll be spending on. But there are several other projects like the urban regeneration projects around the Ikoyi, where you see us delivering things like Milverton Road, the Latif Jakonde Road, places like Victoria Island, where we are doing Adeyemo Alakija and the rest, right? There are new builds, some of which I've mentioned. There are also connecting roads to our multimodal systems, like Ishuti, right, that we are doing. And then there are roads in Ikorodu, in Ekpe, and everywhere around Lagos. You know, sometimes, right, I'm sure we feel it in the traffic situation, and sometimes people complain. It's the reason why Mr. Governor just says, bear with us, we are in a hurry to do a lot of things within the dry season and within the administration as a whole. Those are the things that a lot of the funds are going to in terms of infrastructure. There are also a lot going on the partnership side because, like I said, Lagos can't do it alone, right? So you see us doing the broadband fiber duct infrastructure. On the health side, we are rehabilitating all the general hospitals, Harvey Road, Isolo, Lagos Island, and so on and so forth. And we are building new ones like the Ojo General Hospitals. We delivered the Mother and Child Hospital at Ekpe, and so on and so forth. In education, we are investing significantly, training 15,000 teachers, putting electronic devices in their hand to ensure we standardize their curricula and are able to monitor them remotely as to how they pace, right? And we're rehabilitating a lot of schools, almost 322 dilapidated schools done, about 74,000 chairs and furniture, right, that have been put behind the schools, right? And all of that we're doing. And Oseni, you will find also that the state government is having to also invest a lot in primary education, right? Even though the state is supposed to focus a lot on secondary, we recognize that if early education is weak, right, then the input you get in your secondary level becomes very weak. So significant investment is going in early education as well, right, where we are also using technology, right, to both administer and to train our people. And the outcomes are quite interesting, Oseni.
Well, Honorable Commissioner, one of the points made by the state governor when he was presenting the budget was his old argument about the special status for Lagos and how that should result in supplementary funding. I would like you to comment on that issue about, you know, a special status for Lagos. And then what are the challenges that you foresee? Nobody foresaw that in 2020, there will be COVID-19 and all the challenges that will come with that. What are the challenges that you see ahead? Bearing in mind also that we are not out of the woods yet with the pandemic.
Okay, so the pandemic is still on, and we are trying to manage it. Mr. Governor is leading from the front, right? But we need to begin to look at Lagos separately. It's the reason why we speak the way we speak. Lagos is not just a state. We must begin to view Lagos as a national asset, right? I always say that, look, when you see the 10-lane highway coming from the international airport into Lagos, it is to the glory of the nation. It's a national honor that we see. I talked about the expressway that will take the deep seaport outputs through wide rigid pavement. When we attracted investment into that deep seaport, it was clear that we were going to be preparing for the onslaught, and it helps us prepare for the onslaught of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Again, that is a national level benefit, right? Lagos has all the major companies in Nigeria have their headquarters here. And the amount of economic activities that happens in Lagos that puts pressure on the infrastructure, right, is something that a lot more resources needs to be allotted to it. And that is why we always push the idea of a special status for Lagos. Because when Lagos stood against coronavirus, it was not just for Lagos. We were the epicenter, and we're the epicenter because, right, we control almost 70% of the traffic coming into Nigeria, either by air or by sea. And therefore, that resource that is required to ensure that when things like that comes, like Ebola did come the other time, Lagos must be strong enough as a frontline defense for the country. I don't see many people of significance who do not have a place in Lagos. And that is why we view it that Lagos should be given that kind of special status position. Today, people might say we have a lot of revenues into Lagos, but the truth is that the revenue to GDP of Lagos, in other words, the revenue that supports the economic activity is still about 2%. That's one of the lowest in the world. Right? If you want to sustain the economic activity in Lagos, you need to multiply almost by 5 times the revenue that Lagos currently earns as an international standard. I mean, you see Egypt at 14, right? And Lagos is just at 2. And that economic activity, which is a national one, tends to put pressure locally on the state. So when you see the challenges at Apapa Port, those are national challenges that Lagos State tend to bear. And therefore, the argument for a national status is very rife, right? It's the same thing when we look at security as well. We feel Lagos should be allowed to drive state policing because the amount of investment we put today in that area is able to sustain that. And we feel we need to try it and see whether it does, and which we believe will deliver great value. Because if Lagos is safe, then the productivity of Nigeria becomes stronger and stronger, and we're able to pull, right, other people out of poverty. Because as a consumption and a big market center it is, it can stimulate production up country, right, if things work well in Lagos. And I think that's the reason why we keep pushing this agenda, not for selfish reasons, but for national development.
Right. How is Lagos preparing for the AFC FTA? Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. And how does the budget speak to that?
So every of this infrastructure we talk about basically speaks to that. When you begin to speak of the African Continental Free Trade, it's going to liberalize and common-size all our trading laws. In other words, I can choose, for example, to buy my beef from South Africa, and I do not expect it to present to me there should not be any barrier of South African beef coming into the Lagos market. Therefore, Lagos, in positioning itself as a hub, needs to ensure that our production of beef out of Nigeria becomes extremely competitive when it comes to the African market. Is the reason why we are introducing feedlots, is the reason why we are approving the grazing laws, so that we can fatten the beef, so that we can ensure that the quality of the beef is strong and can fight that market. It is in response to that the investment in the deep sea port makes sense, because you have a deep point there. That port in its phase 2, when completed, will carry about 3 times the capacity of a Papa port, right? And it will have very efficient system, because big vessels can come in there and turn around very quickly. And also the evacuation by the roads which we are doing from Eleko Junction to Ekpe, right? Rigid pavement is getting itself prepared, actually, for that heavy vehicular and logistics systems, right, that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement does present. But beyond that, when we now say we want to focus a lot on our people and our people development, it will not be natural resources that makes this thing work. It will be the cerebral capacity of your people, the technical know-how of your people. So we are driving at the very artery our enlargement in terms of our skill base in technical education and vocational education. And we are partnering with development partners to just make this happen, so that there is a connection between the education system and the industry. And both working together are able to prepare us for that fight, right? So that we are competitive in every area. It's also in that light we're thinking about considering an energy policy, because we can't remain stranglehold on energy just because of some federal system that needs to work a little bit differently. So we want to begin to push an agenda to say, look, can we do more in the energy space? Because energy utility bills begin to constitute a lot in terms of the cost of production, and it has a way of limiting our productive capacity. Right? Today, the amount of generators in Lagos alone can take us off the grid. So is there a thinking, innovation that we could deploy? So it's the reason why we invest a lot in last week, the Lagos State Science Innovation Council are putting over $1 billion there for people to think, for our universities to be creative, to look for solutions to traffic issues, to health issues, and so on and so forth. It's in that light that if we keep our people sound and ready, then our people will take on Africa successfully. And again, like we always say, if Lagos succeeds in taking on Africa successfully, then Nigeria will have received a very strong chance to succeed and will indeed succeed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Egube, Commissioner of Economic Planning and Budgeting in Lagos State.